community, I'm Serene Musselman. Welcome to Behind the Message. I'm sitting down with Carrie Laddiser, our teaching pastor. We just wrapped up week 2 of Searching for Answers, and we've been talking about a bit of a heavy topic today.
Sure.
We're exploring pain and suffering and where we find God in the midst of that. And so I have a few questions for you. If you haven't seen the message yet, though, be sure to head back over to communitychristian.info. Go watch that message. But Carrie, when I think about experiencing pain or heartbreak, in today's message, we looked at stories from people in the Bible who also experienced suffering.
Sure.
But why would I want to go read those stories? Like, what does the Bible hold for me in the stories of people who lived thousands of years ago, for me to take away to apply to my own search for where God is at in the midst of my own pain and suffering?
Maybe this is one of my favorite things about the Bible, actually, is that it's a story that doesn't leave out the bad parts. Most of the stories that we're drawn to, maybe there's like a moment of crisis, but we love the good parts, the happy endings. A sitcom can kind of wrap up conflict in like 22 minutes or whatever. Yes. So I love that it doesn't leave out the bad parts. Mm-hmm. And just in my own like challenging seasons of suffering or pain, I have found sometimes it gives me like words or language when I'm struggling to find words to even shape that. So like going to some of the Psalms, right, of lament where people are angry and frustrated with God and crying out and in a cave and there's people after them, just going to those places in the Bible. I think it's helped me feel less alone in the midst of those. Like, okay, I'm not the first person to feel like God's forgotten about me or that there's injustice and to be frustrated with God about it. I think God can handle our big feelings in those moments. And actually, I think that's when we can experience God, is when we're honest with him about those. So for me, those ancient texts, even though they're old and we could kind of write them off as like, what do they know about today? When you dig into the grittiness of those stories, I think they provide sometimes language for us when we need it most.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I look at those stories, I see them dealing with their pain and suffering in different ways, which goes into what you're saying. If we can actually see ourselves reflected in those stories, their humanity.
Totally.
And when I think about how like I've responded to seasons of pain, I can see how I often tend to like isolate myself. I want to like hide my pain from others.
Yeah.
And it's been helpful for me to know, even as we explored the character of God through these stories, that God sees me and is with me in those moments, isn't like distant from me.
Yeah.
And so I wonder for you, like in your own seasons where you've experienced pain or heartbreak, as you look at these stories, or maybe even Jesus's suffering, where do you find hope or comfort in what you learn about God through that?
I was just talking with a friend about this actually over the weekend, who's a pastor who was like preparing a talk on this topic, and he was asking people like, what was the thing that got you through a really challenging season, or even a season of deconstructing, like what you believed about God or about the church or the world. And for me, it was a question that my counselor asked me at one point in a really difficult season when I was really wrestling and really struggling. And the question was, what do you think God's posture is towards you in that? And as I wrestled with the answer to that, I realized like, oh, I probably thought God was like judging me for feeling like I was like flat on my back and couldn't get up, couldn't kind of stay in the ring or felt really overwhelmed with pain. Like I didn't know if I could move forward. And I kind of had this feeling like maybe God was judging me or was like, come on, girl, like get over it already. Like pull up your bootstraps and keep going. Like God was annoyed with me in my pain. So that was really insightful to try to like imagine why I thought that was God's posture towards me. But then when he invited me to wrestle with like, what if God's posture towards you is that he grieves with you? Like what if God actually grieves for us in the midst of pain or suffering or injustice? What if God's heart is actually even more broken than ours about what it is that we're facing? And so something about just the tenderness of God's heart towards me, and maybe that comes down to, I think it's through one another that we experience the good qualities of who God is. I think that's the beauty of the church. And so maybe if you have not been able to open up with somebody about pain or suffering, or if, I'm very similar. I tend to isolate in that or feel like I need to hide my pain or Maybe if you've never experienced somebody's tenderness towards you in pain, or even a parent's tenderness towards you in pain as a kid, maybe it's really hard to imagine that that's God's posture towards us. But if we have those moments that we can open up to somebody and journey with somebody through pain and suffering, or even just bring somebody else into it to bear witness to it, something about that is really validating, right, to what you're experiencing. And then I think that opens up the opportunity to experience God's tenderness towards us when we can invite other people in.
I love what you're saying there, that not only can we learn more about God's posture to us through reading these stories in Scripture, but we actually see that revealed in our interactions with each other.
Totally.
It's like God's image being revealed to us through each other, which is how we were designed.
Totally.
I love hearing what you're saying there, that, you know, rather than hearing, well, Carrie, just like pull yourself together, or Serene, get back to me when you have it all figured out.
Come on,
and I don't
Serene.
have to deal with your like uncomfortable pain, that God wants to be there right with us in the middle of it.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Going back to your point of experiencing it through other people, at the beginning of your message, you gave us some examples of these platitudes that we can offer each other when we see someone suffering. And I'm guessing for some of us listening to the message, we might have realized that we've actually done that. I have too, that we've said those platitudes. Yeah. So I want to ask you, where do we go from there? If we've like recognized that in ourselves, how do we take a next step to maybe adopt some practices of offering care and empathy and connection, of sitting in the dirt with someone, so to speak, as you talked about in the message? Where do we go from here?
Two things come to mind for me, and one of them is like more maybe self-reflective, and one of them is probably really practical. I think the self-reflective one is, I have had to ask, why do I feel the need to offer a platitude to somebody in the midst of pain or challenge? And usually it's about my own discomfort. Right? I feel really uncomfortable when somebody else is in pain, and I want to fix it, or I want to make them feel better, or I want to say something that's encouraging that could even be true, right? Like sometimes there is truth to those things that are platitudes, but they're not helpful, and they're not helpful to the person in pain sitting in front of me. They're about alleviating my own discomfort around their pain. And so there's like that reflection of maybe why do we feel like we need to offer platitudes in the midst of pain. The other one that comes to mind is just really practical, and I think that's just asking somebody, how can I support you? You know, in this. I have a teenage daughter, and so when I hear about things that she's facing or struggling with, like, I want to fix it, I want to make it better, I want to heal the pain, I want to promise her something good is going to come from it, you know, give the platitudes, but I'm trying to practice just saying, how can I support you? And maybe you just need somebody to listen, and I can just listen, just be present with you in it. Maybe you're trying to calibrate, like, is this normal? Do other middle schoolers face this? How bad is this? You know, maybe you want some feedback or some validation. Maybe you do want coaching on what is it that I can do to try to alleviate this problem. Maybe you need intervention. Like, maybe as a parent you need me to get involved, but I can assure you, if I get involved, I'm thinking about something we're facing right now, and that's not what she wants from me, she may never invite me into that again, right? And so just saying, how can I support you, to a spouse, to a coworker, to a friend, to a colleague, in some ways that even restores their agency in the midst of pain, to not assume that I know what they need or what I can do, but to just ask them. It actually gives them something back that they're probably really needing to help overcome or face the challenge that they're in.
Yeah. I've sometimes heard it described as the ministry of presence, of just being fully present in the pain or in the questions, even if you don't have the answers or they're not ready for answers, just to say, I'm here with you. Which is what the message today told us that God does for us as well, which is so encouraging and hopeful. So thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, thanks so much for diving in. I love getting to chat with you.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today on Behind the Message. As mentioned at the beginning, if you missed this week's message, head over to communitychristian.info. We also have lots of resources there for you. If you are going through a season maybe of grief or pain, connect with others who can walk alongside you. Specifically, many of our locations have Grief Share available, so you can go online to communitychristian.info, find out resources there so that we can walk alongside you and be with you in this journey. We'll see you next time.
Would you like any water in there?
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it room temperature Gatorade? Because that might be why.
Oh, really?
Do you
We're
drink
all
room
too
temp
old to
Gatorade?
eat sugar.
I didn't really
too.
think of it. Thank you.
There wasn't even a garbage can. Were you trying to throw it into your purse? Because you almost made it right into your bag. That's what you were trying to do, right?
Yeah,
'Cause you're gonna take it
100%. Yeah, I wasn't going to
recycle it
make you
later.
clean up my mess. Yeah.
Exactly.